Welcome back to Practice Perfect, Torts Thinkers. This is a review of false imprisonment, an intentional tort that protects an individual's interest in freedom of movement. False imprisonment redresses the dignitary or physical harm that results when one's will to choose their location is subordinated to the will of another without right or privilege. To succeed in an action for false imprisonment, the plaintiff must show the defendant acted with the intent to confine the plaintiff or a third person within boundaries fixed by the defendant actually confined the plaintiff, and the plaintiff was either conscious of or harmed by the confinement. Let's break these elements down one by one. First, the defendant must voluntarily act. Suppose Jack and Jill are camping. Jack, while soundly asleep, closes the door to his camper, confining Jill inside. Here, he will not be liable because the sleeping Jack did not voluntarily act, nor in this example did Jack evidence any intent. Intent for false imprisonment means the same thing as it does for other intentional torts. One acts with the intent to falsely imprison when they have the purpose of confining another, or when they act knowing the confinement of another is substantially certain to occur. Imagine Jack thinks Jill is outside the camper fetching a pail of water, and Jack locks the door to the camper to secure it, planning to go help Jill with her task. Unbeknownst to Jack, however, Jill is inside the camper. Jack didn't have intent to confine because he didn't try to lock Jill inside, nor did he know Jill was inside. Note that an actor who doesn't act intentionally might still be liable for negligence when his unreasonable but unintentional act causes harm. Now, if Jack did mean to lock Jill inside, then Jack certainly would have intent to confine. Here's a twist. What if Jack meant to lock Jill inside? But unbeknownst to Jack, Jill was outside fetching a pail of water. It was Jill's younger sister, Jane, inside the camper. Did Jack have intent to confine Jane? Yes. In this situation, the law will transfer Jack's intent to confine Jill to an intent to confine Jane. For more information, see our Practice Perfect review on the intent requirement. What if Jane decides to get back at Jack and locks Jack out of the camper? Is this false imprisonment? No. To be false imprisonment, the defendant must fix the boundaries that confine the plaintiff. While locking Jack out prevented Jack from entering into a place he wanted to be, it does not confine him to boundaries fixed by Jane. Let's turn to the next false imprisonment requirement, actual confinement, and return to poor Jack and Jill. If Jill locks Jack in the camper with the intent to trap Jack inside, and there is only one way in and one way out of the camper, Jack is, obviously, actually confined. But what if we gave the camper a back door? Is Jack actually confined? No. An actor is not actually confined if there is a reasonable means of escape that they know about. In our example, Jack certainly knows about the existence of his back door, and it's reasonable for him to use it, even if he prefers the front door. Sometimes a question can arise as to whether an escape route is a reasonable means of escape. Suppose this camper didn't have a back door, but instead had a window Jack could readily crawl out of to safely reach the ground outside. Is Jack actually confined? No. It is unreasonable for Jack to refuse to utilize a known avenue of escape merely because it entails a slight inconvenience. What if that window was too small to fit his body? But Jack could use an available axe to chop away at the wall and enlarge the opening. Is Jack confined? Yes. That is not a reasonable means of escape, and Jack is actually confined. Well, this camping trip is not going well. Later on, when Jill uses a ladder to climb on top of the camper to do some repairs, Jack took his revenge by moving the ladder away. Is Jill confined? Yes. The restatement makes it clear that one is confined if there is no reasonably safe means of escape. Here, Jill might easily get hurt if she were to jump down from this camper, so Jill is actually confined. The restatement also clarifies that one is not required to take an available means of escape if the circumstances are such as to make it offensive to a reasonable sense of decency or personal dignity, or if one does not reasonably know of the means of escape. As you can see, there is a lot to this confinement element. For example, if Sally uses a gun to coerce Harry to drive to the bank and withdraw a large sum of money, Sally has confined Harry in this moving car. Confinement may be by actual or apparent physical barriers. For example, if Darlene uses a wheelchair and is unable to move without it, Dan confines her if he takes her wheelchair away with the intent to keep her in her bed. The confinement may be by physical force, and it can also be by a threat to apply physical force. There may also be confinement by submission to a threat to inflict harm upon a member of the other's immediate family, or when an actor unlawfully conditions another's ability to leave on the relinquishment of his property. Confinement may also be by taking another into custody under the assertion of legal authority. The final element is that the plaintiff must either be conscious of or harmed by the confinement. Suppose Jane is sleeping when John intentionally locks her in her room, and when she awakes, John has already unlocked her door. Here, John is not liable. This is true even if, when Jane wakes, she is upset to learn of her confinement. No liability, because she was not contemporaneously aware of the confinement, nor injured by it in any way. Finally, there is no false imprisonment if there was a legal privilege to confine or if the plaintiff consented. In addition, many jurisdictions recognize a so-called shopkeeper's privilege to detain someone for a reasonable time and manner if the merchant had probable cause to believe the person detained has unlawfully taken merchandise. The restatement does not address whether these are affirmative defenses that the defendant proves or whether proving lack of consent and legal privilege are elements of the plaintiff's affirmative case, and jurisdictions appear to differ on their approach to this. This concludes our Practice Perfect review on false imprisonment.